love seeing such a big group and lots of people I know and lots of people I don't know. I hope to know you. And so thank you, Carl, for inviting me to come. In 1950, my husband graduated from, well, back up a year. In 1949, I lived in Ames, Iowa. And I had finished college. I'd gone off to New York City to work for 2 years on Woman's Home Companion magazine. Now that's a long time ago when that was published. But anyway, that was my job. And so I worked 2 years there, and then I came back to Ames to marry my high school, my 7th grade sweetheart, although it was not constant between 7th grade and marriage. And he had another year of forestry to go because he'd been in World War II, and so he missed 3 years of college and was making those up. So we left Ames for a summer job up here on the Gifford Pinchot National Forest at Wallop Lake. Now, if any of you have been into Wallop Lake, it's way back. It's in the it's actually in the Packwood district, and in those days you had to go to Randall, which had its own district, to get into Wallop Lake. It was 55 miles in and off the highway from Randall by Forest Service roads, which in 1950 were still not completely rebuilt. You know that. The roads had sort of gone hot when other things were more important. So we were way back there. We got to this little cabin. And 10 by 14, I think it was. It might have been 10 by 20, but anyway, very small. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But anyway, that's the beginning of our experience in the West. It started then. I'm going to start, I know I've already started, but I'm going to start by just reading the preface of this book. The book's name is Coming to Stay, A Columbia River Journey. And when I got to thinking about, I wanted to write about living on the reservations because it was a wonderful privilege. It really started, the contact with the West started in 1949 when we were married, but in 1950 is when he graduated and then came out here for a job. But anyway, at a writing workshop in 1993, a young tribal policeman from the Colville Indian Reservation read a piece about tribal leader Lucy Covington. As we left the room, I told Bill Joseph how good it was to hear his story. The Covingtons were one reason my husband stayed in the Indian Service, I said, and told him of the time Lucy and Johnny Covington rescued Bud from a stranded pickup on a cold night on the reservation. Returning home from a long day scaling logs 50 miles away in the Sandpoil Valley, Bud had slipped off the icy Cache Creek Road in a snowstorm. Wintertime. It was always dark when we heard his rig turn into the alley behind our house at the agency south of Nispelem. His stomp on the back porch was the signal for our 3 toddlers to race to the door. No matter how tired he was, he listened to their chatter as he ate his supper, bathed them, read a book, and put them to bed. How else will I know them, he said. But that night, when the Covingtons dropped him off, the children were long asleep. Distraught by visions of what could have happened, I had given them baths, read stories, tucked them into bed. In my mind, I had packed up the 4 of us and fled the 100 miles to Spokane to catch a plane for Iowa and home. Home was not a word Bud would use for that that quiet, and special too, Midwestern place where we had grown up. He insisted that home is where we are. In those days, most American men thought the jobs they found would be like their marriages forever. As a bride of the 1950s, I expected and welcomed the same future. As far as Bud was concerned, we had come to this place to stay, or if not here, at least at another Indian reservation in the Northwest, where a good forester was needed to help manage a valuable timber resource. As a result, our neighbors at the Colville Agency and our other new friends on the reservation were people we expected to know forever. We moved around after those early years on the Colville, but always among related people of the Columbia Plateau, to Warm Springs in Oregon and Toppenish on the Yakama Reservation. During alternating stays in Washington, D.C., reservation friends came to town and to dinner. Today at my door up here, up there in the woods in the Hood River Valley, or at celebrations and other visits, I continue to see people Bud and I knew before our children were born. More often now, I see children and grandchildren of these friends. For us, our expectation proved to be true. We stayed. I told Bill Joseph that I wanted to write about that life. Stories of gifts, of mysteries and joy, of anguish and heart's ease. I had come as a bride to the Colville Reservation. Our children were born there. They went to grade school at Warm Springs and swam in Chautauqua Creek, bicycled over the Red Hills to Canada. They grew toward adulthood on the Yakama Reservation. One is buried there. Although there were intermittent stays in Washington, D.C., we always returned to this land we call home. Why did it work for us? How did we change? These are the questions I hope to answer. I've lived my entire life in touch with Native people of the Columbia Plateau, I told Bill. Adult life. Can I write about this? I asked. Are these stories mine to tell? And that was a big question, really, you know. I mean, are those stories ours to tell if it's about us and somebody different from us? The young man thought a minute. Are there children there who call you Auntie? I pictured Chrissy and Ocha, Renee, Tess, and others. Yes, I said. Then write about that. And so I began. So that was how the book began, and that's why it's called Coming to Stay, because I realized as I began to write about this life that that's what had happened. We just moved here to the Northwest, and we never intended to go anywhere else. And so I'm still here. I'm going to then take you through the story itself with some slides, just so you can get a sense of what this is about, what that life is about. So let me see if I can manage this. I've got a stool back here, and I'm not going to be, well, I'll be doing a little talking. I'm going to pull it around.
Somebody catch the lights there.
Yeah, can you see? I mean, you're going to... Does that help? Some? Okay, I have it back up. I have an interesting arrangement here, which is I wanted to put in a couple of maps, so I put them in at the end, and then now we're back. No, okay, just a minute, please. You got to guess where those two places are. There we go. I also often use when I'm somewhere else with people who don't understand what the word plateau means. I realize that the Columbia Plateau is really a newish, well, I don't know that it's newish, but that in Native art, it's come to be known as a distinct place, a distinct region. And that's, you are really living on the Columbia. You're not on the Columbia Plateau, you're living on the Columbia. But these reservations where we live, the Colville is the largest land area in the state, and that's the reservation at the top of that map. Now, the Colville has a straight across top line, which was, when it was reserved reservation by the Indians for themselves. It went to the Canadian border. But there was need for that northern land for settlement above the Colville Reservation to the Canadian border. So this is why the Colville has that straight line as a border. So it's up there out of the north of Grand Coulee Dam. The Lake Roosevelt is on Colville land. Actually, the water backed up from Grand Coulee Dam until it was built. And the little tail on the Colville Reservation up there is the Spokane Reservation. So when people talk about that, that's Spokane. Then the Yakama Reservation, you know, is the next largest. It's actually maybe about the same size. And there it is down there where Yakama is, just below the city of Yakama. And then below that is Warm Springs. So you see we moved from first up there, then down to Warm Springs, and then up to the Yakama Reservation. The wonderful thing about this is the people living on those reservations are married to people on those other reservations, and they have relatives. You learn things like you learn in a small town that you just don't talk about anybody until you find out who you're related to. But the system is even bigger than in the normal small town. Okay. Now that's my yard. Right now. Okay, so Bud and I came out then to this little cabin on the Gifford Pinchot. It was the Columbia National Forest, and it was the year 1950 then, 49. The year that they were married, and that's the year at the end of that summer it became the Gifford Pinchot. So that made me know about Gifford Pinchot, who I would not have known about, but he's a very interesting man, sort of a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, and a very interesting conservationist. This is from the front porch, and we're looking right into the Goat Rocks. And right behind us is the reservation boundary of the Yakama Reservation. And I used to look out that other direction and just say, oh my gosh, there are Indians over there. You know, it's really, really intriguing to me. Then we lived, he went back to college that year of 49 to graduate in forestry, and his first job that summer was also, well, and I want to go back just a minute, because that Wild Lake guard station was on Cowlitz, on Sispus drainage, and the Sispus drainage puts it into the Columbia River drainage. And that's an important thing for me. This, however, is Clark's Fork, the Clark's Fork River at Thompson Falls, Montana. And his job that summer was as a district guard for the Forest Service in Thompson Falls. Very beautiful country there. If you've been over there, that Clark's Fork, it's a narrow valley, actually kind of like the Hood River Valley up where it's narrow. So that's my second Columbia experience, because that's where I lived first. And then we came to the Colville Reservation, and the day we came to the town of Coulee Dam, and came down into the government town, you know, all those pretty, if you've been up there, you know that right, you come down the hill past the dam itself, and then there's this pretty tree-covered village, which was the engineer's town. And it was very beautiful. So this is taken just below the dam, obviously. We crossed the bridge, and we looked up at the top of the bridge of that dam, and in electric lights it said, "Best wishes, Mr. Banks." And then if you know anything about Grand Coulee Dam, Banks was the chief engineer of that project, and he was leaving that. So the day we arrived, Mr. Banks was moving out. So we went for 16 miles north of Grand Coulee Dam, and up into the town of Nispila, because that was the address. So we went into the town and we hadn't seen any trees anywhere. We just couldn't figure out where in the heck we must be. And so they said, well, you've come too far, go 2 miles back down the road, and that's the Colville Indian Agency. And this was built by maybe 1910 or 12. And it's built like an army post. And these houses were all alike, and they were all around the central campus, called the campus. But the trees had been allowed to grow on that campus because they didn't use it for a parade ground or anything as an army post would. And this was our house. And in the story begins with us coming there and living in that house. You can see through behind. We were there 2 weeks, And then the little house to the left is a duplex. We lived in both sides of that, first for, 2 or 3 months, the next one until I had my first baby. And then we needed to move into a bigger house. And fortunately, our neighbors moved out, and we were able to have this house. These houses are pretty run down now, but it was a wonderful place to live with little children, which we had very quickly. The first summer, we came in October, so in July, we've been told that they had a circle celebration. They called it the Circle. And it's just across the road from the agency. You're looking west here, you're looking at the Columbia Valley. The Nispila Creek, that Nispila is named for, just flows right down between those hills and down into the Columbia River. So there we were again on a tributary, literally, of the Columbia River. And I woke up in July, just before the 4th of July, and in the night, and there were drums. Oh my gosh. I've been living on this reservation. I hadn't thought anything about Indians. I mean, it really war patterns. And so I woke my husband up and I said, what's that? What's that? And he says, calm down, it's the Circle. And they're just starting, and the drums are still going. It's only 12 o'clock at night, but you go back to sleep. And so we got up the next morning, and we went down to this Circle grounds. All these teepees were up, and it was such a thrill. My next door neighbor this is Ann George. She's the granddaughter. No, she's the daughter of a man named Cleveland Kamiakin. Now, Cleveland Kamiakin was the son of Kamiakin, they call him a Yakama chief. He actually came from over the Palouse. So she's the granddaughter of one of the signers of the treaty, which just interested me a lot. And at the time, I didn't realize, I should have known this, but she's Miss Purse. So what are Miss Purse doing up there on the Colville Reservation? And it wasn't really until, recent years that it dawned on me what the history of this. And that is that you know the story of Chief Joseph and his people, and that they were one group of Miss Purse. They were the ones over in the Lyle Mountains, and that they're the whole campaign between the cavalry and Chief Joseph was this great epic story that many of you have read. And Joseph and the people traveled with the men, of course. I mean, it was a campaign. They were being shoved toward Canada, hoping they could get to Canada. And they, when they were captured, when Joseph really realized that as he says, our children are starving, they gave up and then were sent to Oklahoma. Well, when they were sent back from Oklahoma, instead of going back to their own land, which was by that time completely, so that wonderful, beautiful Wallowa Valley, full of wonderful agricultural land, it was full. And so they were sent up there to the Colville Reservation. And I didn't know at this time that here's Ann George, but she doesn't speak the same language as the other 17 groups who are interior sailor-speaking people. So there's just a whole lot of things. I was very naive, and I didn't even, And these children, this is a PhD professor at Seattle University with pulling her hand out of her mouth. This is a 6'7" beautiful man who runs a big river grill in Stevenson and El Rio. I mean, they own both. He and his wife own both restaurants. So I think it's the pants, and the pants do not match my skirt. He did not have to wear pants to match his skirt. Ann George herself then is the Kamiakin granddaughter, and she was my next door neighbor. She lived in that's the house next to mine. And that was her. She's dressed for the Circle, and here she is again then on her horse, and this is the parade, and that's Luis Arqueza, whose husband played with Jim Thorpe against Dwight Eisenhower in the Army-Navy game of 1913, or 11, whatever. Anyway, that's, and her husband is the one who worked in the woods, was assigned to work in the woods with my husband, who's this raw, young forester, and of course Al Arcasa knew a whole lot more about the woods than Bud did, but he was a wonderful mentor for my husband. So that's the circle parade, that's the beginning of that celebration. I sort of dwell on this because I love this. This was not the year we got there, actually, these pictures, because that child on the right is the older boy, the bigger brother of those two little kids in that other picture. And this is Elijah Williams posing. You know what, they were wonderful. They were so sweet to pose for tourist cameras. And those are the hills around this Pila, if you've ever been there. It's a beautiful place. This simply is Chief Joseph. It's just illustrating it, that these people in this circle celebration were largely the Joseph people, the Nispers. And I didn't know that. I thought it was all the members of the Colville group, but it wasn't. This is Joseph Schlick, who is, that's my son's name, the one who runs the restaurant. And he's standing by Chief Joseph's grave. I make a really big deal of this because we've always made a big deal of it. Well, when we got there, it was scary. I was pregnant with my first child, and it was such a scary place to come to. It was new. And people came, these three women came across the street, and the story is in this book, and to welcome us. And that was lovely, too. And it was a grandmother of about, she's probably 70, and her daughter who was probably 45, and her daughter who was 13. And we said, we had just learned by going to Wilbur. Anybody been to Ma's Cafe in Wilbur, Washington? Mm-hmm. Well, in the old days, the menu talked about Samuel Wilbur, a convict for whom the town of Wilbur was named. Well, it turns out my husband's grandmother was a convict, so we did a lot. This later learned that they were relatives, the same family, and so this is Wild Goose Bill Condon, then the name got changed, as grandson. So just in two generations, he, anyway, was a cousin of my husband's, and he lived there, and he brought his horse in for my kids to ride the day we left. We left there in 1957, and and so I never actually saw this. I've driven past Celilo during those years, never looked. It makes me so sad that I didn't have sense enough to pay attention or know anything about Celilo. So I put it in here to honor it, and the fact that this is the year after this, it was, that fishing was gone there. This is J.W. Thompson, who was a photographer in Seattle, and he took many slides of the Indians of Western and Eastern Washington, two separate groups of slides. And I had used this and one other slide of his in my basketry book, and had gotten permission from his daughter to use it. And so she knew me, I knew her. Well, eventually the relationship led to her giving Maryville Museum all the extant slides of her father's. And we just have this wonderful 3,000 slides. We gave the other 3,000 that were Western Washington to the Museum of History and Technology in Seattle, because those Indians were all from the west side. But this is you've seen this other places, because J.W. Thompson gave sets of those slides to many schools. But anyway, Mary Hill holds his original collection. And I just used this because that's the Jim family, Maggie and the mother, and then two of her daughters, as the water is flowing backwards from the David Dam was built. We moved immediately 6 years on the Colville Reservation, and so we dragged these little kids to Washington, D.C. And it was just to put it into kind of context of time. They were rebuilding the east front of the Capitol. And I love this picture because it looks like that dome's going to fall off. It seems very, very threatening. And then, so this simply represents moving to Washington, D.C. for 4 years. And it was a well, there we go. That's a Christmas card that said, "Have a monumental Christmas." Isn't that awful? So we came back to the west. And do any of you know what mountain that is?
Broken Top or Three Finger Jack?
You're close in geography.
Okay.
You are. And this
Granite.
mountain.
Granite Peak.
No, it's Jefferson. So you never see Jefferson. Once you go down there, get to Memphis, you're not looking at Jefferson. If you're coming down I-197, you're looking at the Three Sisters down below. I am. So this actually is taken from up in on Jefferson, on the reservation. I love this. For the Warm Springs people, then this has the same importance to them that Adams has for the Adams. So we get there, and this is our 4th of July parade, and our house is identical to the little White House there, but it's 2 houses over. Just to give you a sense of where we've moved to. We've been in this big city, living in an apartment building, came back to this wonderful, calm campus. And then another 4th of July celebration is what this parade was. It's just the fact that it was just such a wonderful time to see people get their regalia on, and it's great fun to see. And I love these floats that are on trucks, or cars. And the girls on their horses just set. Well, then, because the forestry was going to be, every one of those departments on the reservation had a float in the parade too. This little parade just goes around that central campus. And the boys, this is my oldest boy, gets to sit in this big front end, what is it? It's a little cab, right? I don't know. It's tracked anyway. So he gets to sit in that. And his brother actually got to sit in a truck. That was good. And this poor little girl here with her mouth full of watermelon, she had to sit on the curb and watch them go by. Because that's the way times were in 1957, or 6, whenever this was. So the 4th of July celebration was great. My boys played baseball, and I've got a baseball story here about going to Culver, and one of the mothers in the Culver Little League team yells at our referee, and she knew he was from Warm Springs, and she was really mad at him because he made a bad call, and she says, "Go take a bath." And I sort of said, I looked at Pruney Kachaya sitting next to me. I said, "Oh, is that what I heard?" And she says, "We hear it all the time." It was one of the first really times that I was in a situation where I was hearing what the Indians were hearing from in some communities. So that's I don't think it maybe it wasn't Culver, maybe it was Metolius. And then the Boy Scout Carnival had these wonderful little had a powwow, and this is Lucille, Gary, and I know the other boys, but these are my kids' classmates. And we were there 4 years, and so we packed up and moved back to Washington, D.C. My husband went back the first time to rewrite the timber contracts for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They'd been first drawn up, I think, in the 30s, and so his job was to just revise the contracts, and that kept us there for 4 years. Well, this time he was brought back to set up Job Corps centers on Indian land. This was the time of the Great Society. Johnson was president. Kennedy had just been killed that year before this, and so this is 64, isn't it? And so we returned to Washington. And we were there 4 years, and I was working there as doing some editorial work with my kids in high school or junior high. And it was fine because they had been there that other time. It wasn't any big threat for them. We really felt as if our home was our car, and that's kind of hard on people, but we got over that. So we came back then to the Yakama Reservation 4 years later, in 1969, and one of the And all these years, I had seen very little of this kind of art other than well, in those parades, in those celebrations. That's sort of the point of putting this picture in here. So we get in here and they have this Giuliani Arts and Crafts Fair. They still have it. It's wonderful. And you go up there, well, you know the Tide Valley Fair. Many of you have been to that. When the Orange Springs women would come and set up their tables, and it wasn't that things were for sale, they were for admiration. And that was just like a little museum. And that's what this is, that they're just showing their things. So for me, this is really when I began to get interested in the arts and in basketry eventually. During the time we were there, it was the time of the big land return ceremony for Track D. Now some of you were impacted by that because it did change the reservation boundaries toward the south, you know that. And the Bird Creek Meadows, for instance, I get mixed up with Snowgrass Flats in my mind. Bird Creek Meadows then came back into tribal ownership. And this is, and I'm working for the Top newspaper. This was great fun. And next to me over there on our right is Kim Agnew, the daughter of the Vice President of the United States in that year, 72, I guess. And this is the tribal chairman, Bob Jim, and this is the Secret Service guy looking like a Forest Service man there. But because I was working for the paper, not because I was married to the superintendent, I was allowed to go up to Mount Adams Lake, which is the most gorgeous place on the mountain, and to this picnic. And I put it in here, I guess, to show off probably, or maybe to put it in context with history. All right, my daughter, my little, sweet, shy daughter, Catherine, then was, because she was back new in town that fall, was chosen as Miss Toppenish, and the name is Miss Friendliness for Toppenish, and I don't know if they even do it anymore. Community do it. So there she is, up in her little kind of cowboy Indian outfit. They've got fringes on the dress. And, but sitting in front of her is Miss Yakama Nation. And they named the float the Arrow of Unity. Well, Toppenish was not the most generous town to their neighbors. I mean, that's not often unusual. And so it was, we've invited, as the committee of, this is Karen Jim, who lives at Celilo now. She was Miss Yakama Nation, and then she was runner-up for Miss Indian America, actually. And so she was a wonderful person. And in this book is a little story about the float. So she rode the float with them that summer. And there was a parade in Napton. And on the way to the parade in Napton, this broke down. You know, these floats, if any of you men have had to drive the town's float, it's a horrible job. And it broke down, and before they got to Napton, and we got word of it. And so there was a naval outfit from there's a base, not torpedo, but what's the word? Anyway, missile base up in somewhere in western Washington. And they brought this missile on a trolley, on a cart, and these sailors saw these girls, and they said, how would you like to ride on this missile? So they thought, and it's this hot night in Napton. And so Karen then takes her shawl and she lays it along the missile, and so all those little scanty skirts that the others are wearing, they were all protected from the heat of that. So it was a wonderful time. Well, then this is my oldest boy grown up now. He's 21 years old, and he was a lookout at Wolf. And it's a hard part to read in this book. He's killed in an automobile accident very soon after this. But it's just, I love it. Here he is up in the mountains in a place he loved very much. And behind him, this mountain here, that's what you could see off that edge. So I always put that in, and I did write about it, and I wrote about his death and burial on purpose. I mean, I think it happens to all of us, We all have really things that are very hard to bear. But it was, for me, it was wonderful to be able to then talk about him and to talk about that. Well, there she is, hanging upside down. That's interesting. Where are those? Well, just yes. That is I on the Yakama Reservation. And I began to be working with Head Start children. As I got interested in basketry, I got interested in how, well, I'd always been, we started a kindergarten at Warm Springs that they had not had one. And it became it now is a huge, huge early childhood program that started. And I was chairman of that because I did a cooperative kindergarten in Washington, D.C. with my little kids. And I knew we could start a kindergarten there with parent involvement, and if the tribe paid part of the cost that the parents had to pay too, that kind of thing. And so we started, so I had gotten to be very interested in child development. And when we went back to, well anyway, so then I worked with Head Start. I was a national Head Start consultant, and these are Indian children learning about basketry from the consultant. And then I discovered Wasco basketry. Now you all, many of you have seen this kind of, these baskets. This particular basket was made as, Jean's got a wonderful little one made by Louise Van Pelt Spino from Klickitat. And Louise Spino had made this one, and when you see a bag that has the condor wings different like that, she's chosen to make every one of those different. That's probably Louise's. They're going to be very, the animals will look alike, but she's got those condors. She's just using her ingenuity to do that. And so it was, this is packed untouched. Ike is her name now. And this is a newspaper photo that I took, and I never could find the negative, so we just copied the newspaper photo, and that's why it's so rough and ugly. But that's my first exposure to Wasco weaving. So my sister gave me, at the time of Bill's death, to help me, she gave me a needlepoint set. That's a great idea, because it gave me something to do. You can do something with your hands. And the new needlepoint set on the other side, I made the design, which was, I think, it was coastal, some kind of coastal design, probably macaw, I think. And it said that on the pattern. So I thought, well, I love these Wasco designs. I'll just plot those out in graph paper, and I'll do Wasco designs. So I did. I made this. And so I carried it, and I just really proud of that. And a tribal member came up to me and she said, "Oh, could I buy that from you?" And I said, "Well, no, but I could make you one." And so I made one for her. And then I got to thinking about needlepoint. I'm doing needlepoint here. Why am I doing this in needlepoint? I thought maybe I'd learn something from the designs, but I figured, no, I've got to learn from it. I've got to see how they make those baskets. So this is at Mary Dodds. It's similar to that one, but it's nothing compared to it. This is the real thing. And so I asked Julia So Happy, who lived up Wapato, in the country out of Wapato, and she said, yes, she would teach me. I said, would you teach me to twine, and I'd like to do a story on it. So I said that up front, and I'd like Joe will come along and he'll take pictures, okay? She said, okay, as long as you don't say, I'm the wife of a chief. Interesting. It was such an interesting comment. And I have all kinds of things. I think it's because she hated. There was a woman she was jealous of who was white of the chief. I don't know. For some reason, I know. So then I did learn to twine from Julia. That's just an example of that. That's what got me. Once I realized I had to learn to do those baskets, then I realized that's the only way I was going to know anything about them. And that's why I began to learn to make them. This then is out at, this is Potato Hill. And you're seeing Adams over it. And of course, this is huckleberry season. And Bud and I had gone up, and we'd gone off over to the National Forest on that road. We had a permit to go. I still have a permit to go through the reservation, through that closed area. And so we went off the reservation and picked berries. didn't feel I could pick berries on the reservation. And and that's when I first learned about the huckleberry baskets. Bud ordered me a gallon of huckleberries, and the book talks about that. And the woman brings those berries to me, but they're in the basket. And she says, and they're covered with huckleberry foliage to keep them cool. And so she says to me, I said to her, you want the basket back? Very funny question. And she said, yes. I shocked her, I think. I mean, it just occurred to her, I'm not keeping that basket. Did to me, though. And then she said, but return it with the foliage because I take it back to the hills. So then we left the Yakama reservation and went back to Washington, D.C. again. By this time, the children were grown and in school or off doing their thing. So we were there another year and a half, 2 years, and we just could not stand it. I mean, it was okay to be in Washington, but we needed to come back home. And so my husband had, with his service time, and he had enough years to take early retirement. So he takes retirement with a reduced annuity, which is, we just said, you know what, we're 53 years old, this is fine, we can be fine. And so that's when we came home, and then I began to twine and twine and twine. And this is just an example of my early work. I don't do it, I twine all the time now, but I just twine, not necessarily Wasco design. And then I had this wonderful opportunity many of you have heard Pat Courtney Gold speak, to Lillian Pitt suggested that I apply for what's it called? It's a folk art program, a master artist and apprentice program. And so Ernest Courtney on the right was one of this Pat's little sister, and she was one of my 4-H'ers. I had two Courtney girls as 4-H'ers in my 4-H clubs at Warm Springs. And so then she told Pat about it, and Pat, who had just decided to leave Bonneville as a mathematician, came to we have a year apprenticeship, and one other Wasco woman, Arlene Boileau is her name. So I had these 3 Wasco apprentices, and I would go over there, or they would come here, or I would bring them to Mary Dodds to see the collection. I brought them, the Discovery Center wasn't built yet. So those they now are carrying on that Wasco tradition that had completely died out. I'm very proud of them. We then were, this is just on a visit back to Wapta Longhouse, where we had been given the Indian names, my husband and I. And when we were given names, we were given clothing, which was really sweet. And I don't wear it often, but I wore it that day. And this is right in front of Wapta Longhouse. And those children that are grandchildren of Julia So Happy, who was teaching me to twine. I just threw this in here. It was loose in my box because I love this photo. It's of that first parade on the Colville Reservation. This woman, his name is Barbara Friedlander, and this is the way I'm going to end this slide. Okay. I think what I'd like to do in the time, that takes a lot of time. And if you want to read the book, you can read it, but I will either read a tiny bit from it or I will answer questions. Shall we start with questions? What do you think?
Yes.
What was your favorite place?
That's so interesting. I can't tell you. I acknowledge everyone. There is a little thing I will read to you, very, 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 very short. When we left Warm Springs. When we left Warm Springs, we had been on 2 reservations. And when the time came to say goodbye to all of our good friends at the end of our 5th fine and busy summer on the Warm Springs Reservation, the Employees Club planned a farewell party for us. It was a picnic at the Shady Park and boat launching place on Pelton Lake, where the children had taken Red Cross swimming lessons. Do you know what it's like to swim in Pelton Lake? I mean, maybe it's, I couldn't believe my children would learn to swim there. My teeth were chattering so hard. and they had learned to water ski. The gifts we received that day would change my life. To explain the gifts, I have to go back to our second summer at Warm Springs. My contacts with George Snyder and Ivy Hilty on the reservation, in the reservation extension office, had led to a career of sorts for me, judging in a county fair in our part of Oregon, and eventually at the state fair. So I was with George Snyder getting a ride to the Tide Valley Fair because, what's his name, county agent here. No,
At that time,
Ed Bonham had asked me to judge if any of you are artists and have entered the Tide Valley Fair in 1968 or whatever this was, if you got a blue ribbon, it's my fault. I didn't want to know this. Anyway, so I was going to the Tide Valley Fair to go and be a judge for Ed, and had taken judges training in Salem, all that stuff, or in Corvallis, all that stuff you're supposed to do. And we drew the pickup. His pickup went up above, you know, where you turn into Warm Springs to where the campus is. Well, there are houses up above there. So we went up above where those houses are, just above the road, and came up to this house, and this woman came out. It was a woman whom I knew by that time. And he gets out of the car, drops the gate on the pickup, and she goes in the shed and brings out a tin suitcase. One of those really, you remember those tin suitcases. And he brings it out, and he sets it on the tailgate, and he says to her, just a minute. Or no, she wanted to see in it, that's true, to see if what she thought was there was still there. And so he opened it up for her. Oh my gosh. It was full of Welsh shawls, but cornhusk bags. I had never really seen any cornhusk bags up to that time. They were so beautiful. All the designs different, every one of them. He would turn them over and show me that they're different on both sides. I could not imagine anything so beautiful as this array of all this hand work, all twining. And that's long before I learned to do it. And in fact, at the time, I thought I could never do that. And I cannot do it that beautifully. Okay, well, so anyway, we went to Tide Valley, and that's what this talks about. I'm trying to get myself out of town here. The day came at last to leave Warm Springs for Virginia. We took a final look around the empty house where we had had such good years, then climbed into the 1963 Ford for our third trip across the continent that year. Giving a last wave to the kids on the basketball court. There are always kids out there playing basketball. Bud tapped the horn to salute Ting, the Galbraith's big white dog, barking in their yard. We bumped across the cattle guard and out the gate and onto US 26. Turning east down the hill, we passed the old Heath House, then Madeline St. Germain's. This makes me cry. I just feel it fun. And Bruno's and Quinn's. I looked for Mary Ann at her house in the trees beside the creek. My beaded bag and necklace and the little beaded sewing kit for Kitty were safely packed, but I had hoped to give her a last wave and thanks for the gifts. We came to the bridge and the sign, leaving Warm Springs Indian Reservation. As we crossed the Deschutes River, I had a sudden sensation of loss, of leaving something important behind. I turned to look at the children, and then beside me at my husband. I could only imagine their thoughts. They could picture at least where we were headed, back to Bradley Towers, that's in Washington, D.C. They knew where we were going to go because we'd been there twice before. Kelly and Joe to the school they knew, and Bill to Hammond High School, where he would meet friends from the last spring. He had been back there. I was confident that something interesting would show up for me. As we followed the beautiful river and climbed the familiar winding grade toward Madras, I began to feel better. I knew without a doubt that we would return. This place and the people we knew here would continue to be part of our lives, just as the place and the people we knew. And just as Mount Adams country of our first summer and the people of the Colville continued to be, yes, I thought, as we paralleled the chain of mountains south of Bend. where we would spend the night. We had come into the country to stay. We would be back. And so I felt that way about every place. I loved being there, and I've never felt I left. And that's true for me, because I know many people today. I see people today that I knew before I had children, which I'm 82 years old. How's that possible? It's amazing, isn't it? Other questions? Well, thank you. Where? Yes.
Were you in Alaska at one time?
I've been to Alaska I've only been to Alaska as a Head Start consultant. Yes, I spent 3 weeks in Alaska villages in March, out in the Yukon Kuskokwim River area, southwest Alaska, where you come in on the plane drops you in there in the blizzard, and you find your way to the Head Start Center, and you're going to sleep in this Head Start Center, so you put your stuff in the corner, and you look out in the night, and the northern lights are blazing, and the dogs are all asleep under the snow on top of their dog houses. It just seemed really funny to me. Yeah, I was there, and I loved that.
And what year was that?
I was here, it must have been about 86, 85.
I think that's when I just got back, because when I first met.
And I talked about it or something. Yeah, well, good. Because of that life, I was very comfortable in Alaska too. I mean, it's just what you learn. I mean, you know this. You all know this. You're not babies. You can just be at home anywhere. And some places you like being at home more than others. But I've been very happy every one of those places. Thank you very much.